Stacey. Welcome to the kitchen of my old Kentucky home. Today we'll be doing dishes that are great for cold weather or just when you need a little extra comfort. We're going to be making soup beans, hoe cakes, and hot toddies. Let's get started. For our soup beans, we'll need 8 cups of water, a pound of dried pinto beans, 1 grated onion, a ham hock, and freshly ground black pepper. Making beans is truly one of the simplest and most affordable things you can make to feed a whole family, and it really packs a lot of flavor too. So these are soup beans, also known as just putting on a pot of beans where I come from. And what I've done is I took those pound of dried pintos and soaked them overnight. You can also do a quick soak method that's usually on the back of your package of pinto beans, or you can buy canned version as well. So these have been soaked already, and we're just gonna simply take these, and I can see they've taken on a lot of water, so they take up a lot more room than what they did when they were just dry. And we're simply gonna add our 8 cups of water. You can also use chicken broth or stock if you want. I tend to think that makes it a little over salty because I use the ham hock, but that's up to your personal flavor. Now we're gonna use a ham hock. This is part of the pig. You can also use salt pork or country ham as a seasoning if you want. You're just gonna drop that sucker right in there. Now we have 1 cup of grated onion. This was just a white onion. You can use Vidalia if you want. And finally, some fresh ground black pepper. We're simply gonna stir all this up. We're gonna take it to the stove and bring it to a quick boil, and then we're gonna drop it down and simmer it for 2 hours. So I had really not ever heard the term soup beans until I was an adult, because as I said, with my dad's favorite dish for this, he just simply said, I'm gonna put on a pot of beans. So I did a little research, and this is a term really that came out of Eastern Kentucky. I love how people are going back to the origin stories of foods though and calling them where they started. So I love the term soup beans, and I certainly get it. They are very soupy and you eat them out of a bowl. But they're not to be confused with traditional bean soup, which is served in other parts of the country, here too. And that traditionally is made with northern beans and has things like carrots and celery in it. So while I put these on the stove to simmer for 2 hours, we're gonna go check on Jessica and see how she's coming with those hot toddies.
Today we're gonna make a hot toddy, which in Kentucky we basically consider the cure for the common cold, or basically anything that ails you. So we're gonna use a cup of hot water. This is just below boiling here. And we're also gonna use a tablespoon of honey for its soothing qualities. Stir that in the hot water. And then we've got a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice. Vitamin C is so good for you. And then we're just gonna finish it off with 1.5 ounces of bourbon. And I swear this really does cure a sore throat and is relaxing, put you to sleep, make you feel better if you're under the weather. All right, so I've got this all mixed up. Just gonna garnish it with a lemon wheel, and I'm gonna make 1 more of these for Stacey while she's frying up the hoe cakes.
Well, I can't wait to try that hot toddy, but while the beans finish up, I need to get started on these hoe cakes. So let's do it. What we're gonna need is 2 cups of cornmeal, 3/4 of a cup of milk, and I'm using some whole milk from a local dairy out of Russellville, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. What we're simply gonna do is pour in our cornmeal. This is different than just using grits. These are a little more finely milled, almost to the consistency of a flour, but it's not wheat flour. We're gonna pour in our milk, add our salt, and we're gonna mix this up. It's gonna be like almost like a dough-like consistency, less than a batter. And we're just gonna leave it sit for just a few minutes and let the cornmeal soak in all of that whole milk. And then we might add a little more to thin it to help us get our cakes assembled. So hoe cakes are also known by other names here in the South. Some people call them Johnny cakes, griddle cakes. They look like pancakes, but they aren't quite. They have no leavening agent in them whatsoever, so they're not light and fluffy. But they are gonna fry up nice and golden brown, and you can treat them like a pancake. You can put butter and sorghum, molasses, maple syrup on them, or in a lot of places, people smother them with gravy. Okay, we've let our cornmeal soaked batter rest a little bit to get that milk in there. But as you can see, this wouldn't be the consistency that we would need to roll these out. So we're just gonna add a little more milk. Just kind of use your discretion. We're not looking for a pancake thin batter to pour out, although there are plenty of recipes for hoe cakes, my mother's included, that would make them in that style. I just looked for the oldest recipe that I could find, but there's certainly lots of different recipes out there. Okay, so this is more of the consistency that I think we're gonna need to be able to roll these into balls and to flatten them out to about 1/4 of an inch. So let's give that a try. And I have prepared a cutting board dusted with cornmeal so they wouldn't stick to that before we got them to the pan. Oh yeah, I feel like this is gonna work out really nicely. So I'm just gonna finish up making a cutting board full of these, and then we're gonna take them to the skillet. Okay, let's fry up these hoe cakes. We're gonna take some bacon grease that I took out of my jar in the fridge. You know, every good Kentucky Southern cook has their stock of bacon grease on hand, hopefully. This is a cast iron skillet. So the traditional way to make them, actually the origin of the name hoe cake, hoe is apparently what the English called a certain type of cast iron pan. Well, that's how they got their name, apparently. All right, we're gonna let that come to sort of a medium-high temperature. And we're just gonna take these individually off of our cutting board, put them in the fry pan. You want to leave some room in your skillet to make the turn, make the flip. So I'm just going to do 4 at a time. So we're going to let these cook for a few minutes until we feel like they're golden brown on one side, and then we'll give them a flip. Oh, perfect color, perfectly golden brown. All right, we've got our first batch. I'm gonna cook up the rest of these hoe cakes and join Jessica in front of a fire to sip on some hot toddies. Well, Jessica, sitting in front of this fire makes me compelled to read you a story.
All right, I'm ready.
Seriously. So you know how I collect these old Kentucky cookbooks,
Yes,
right?
a lot of your recipes come from these,
So
right?
this is a new one that I just picked up. It was written in the 70s, but it covers like 200 years of Kentucky cooking. And this is where I got the recipe for the hoe cakes. We were talking about, I didn't make what my mom or grandmother's made, or what your mom, didn't your mom like?
Yeah, I was telling her about it while we were filming, and she told me I better grab some milk, and
Right.
I was appalled with the rolling them out.
I've just got to read you this little excerpt of where this particular recipe came from. It was the Bright's Inn, okay? So the Bright's Inn was built in 1815 by Captain John Bright, and it's in Stanford in Lincoln County on the Wilderness Road. It was a stagecoach shop where weary travelers could find rest and excellent food. A meal was 25 cents with whiskey free.
Oh, I love that.
That kind of place. Isaac Shelby, who was the governor of Kentucky, George Rogers Clark, and Henry Clay were among the many frequent guests of the inn. Hoe cakes, cooked over hot coals in the fireplace, were one of the specialties of Bright's Inn.
Well, that's very cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And so we looked this up. There's no longer, there's a historic marker where that inn is located now, but that's the original recipe that we made today.
Well, and this is a pretty classic recipe for hot toddies. I didn't do anything fancy with like cinnamon or clove or anything like that, but I think that this version is, I like to call it the Kentucky Theraflu. It just does the trick.
Love that, love that. Well, you know, when I saw you film that segment, I almost cried because of the bourbon you selected.
Why?
Well, you wouldn't have known this, and it was, you did the Stillhouse, Jim Beam Stillhouse, but my grandmother would go to the cabinet to get her Jim Beam White Label. She wasn't a big bourbon drinker, she was Italian, so Chianti was more her thing, but I can remember as early as maybe 2 years old having my first hot toddy, and I can still see that Jim Beam White Label.
And isn't it just very Kentucky also to have all of our own like family traditions and different recipes for these classic foods that we all eat?
Absolutely. Well, here's to traditions, Kentucky, and comfort on a cold night.
Cheers.
Cheers.